I have often wondered why the working poor always seems to get the proverbial short end of the stick. I've wondered why or how can a person go to work for 40 hours a week, receive a paycheck, and still have more month than they have money. I'm not talking about folk who are out here just wastefully spending what they earn. I'm talking about folk who are actually budgeting and doing the right thing. How is it that you can work 2 to 3 jobs and still have to make decisions, quality of life decisions, such as, do I rob Peter to pay Paul? Do I pay the rent? Or do I put gas in the car? Do I buy food? Or do I pay the electric bill? I've often wondered, how is it that the working poor continuously gets the raw deal? Now, there's several reasons for this. Circumstance, opportunity, education. I don't want to talk about any of those. There is one reason that we can all point to and that we can all find is a logical explanation as to why the working poor will forever be on the short end of the proverbial stick. That reason is political maturity. Better stated, it is the working poor's inability to obtain said maturity and exercise the same.
You're listening to Essential Discourse with Bruce Smith. This is the podcast that examines the perplexities of real life from a holistic perspective. Bruce is committed to delivering honest and crucial dialogue that is transformative and, with his guests, will not only identify problems, but also bring forward solutions that are relevant, restorative, reasonable, and reliable. Thanks for listening. Let's return to the podcast. Here's your host, Bruce Smith.
In February of 2022, I published an episode on this podcast entitled Political Maturity. That was 9 months ago. 17 downloads. 9 months, 17 downloads. And I would be overly optimistic to think that at least one person listened to the entire episode through. And I went back and I did some self-evaluation, some self-assessments in regards to why didn't that episode that was so important, that was so valuable, so important, why didn't that episode generate more engagements? Why didn't it generate more downloads? And part of the reason is my fault. It was my fault because the podcast was an hour and 40 minutes long. Silly of me to think that people would be interested enough in a subject that they would listen for an hour and 40 minutes. Secondly, there was a lot of history in that podcast. History explaining why voting is such an important aspect of this American life that we're supposed to have. History showing that it's so important that for nearly 100 years, those in power have been trying to discourage us, the working poor, discourage us, intimidate us, and just downright set traps and snares to prevent us from voting. And I thought that history would have been important for people who had forgotten what it took or was never exposed to what it took for us as poor people, particularly Black and brown people, to exercise this right, to obtain this right and be able to exercise this right. And the simple truth is, there's no excuse for anyone not to know that history. So what? They don't teach it in school. You have a computer in your hand on a day-to-day basis. And it's evident that we have not obtained political maturity. And if you have not obtained it, you can't exercise it. And it's evident from some of the outcomes of these elections from this 2022 midterm cycle. In Louisiana, nearly 55% of the voting population, those who are eligible to vote, nearly 55% failed to vote. In Texas, nearly 9.5 million people, in fact, it's over 9.5 million people, of the eligible voting population failed to vote. But the working poor will be some of the main people out here crying, moaning, whining, voicing their discontent, their complaints about the way that their states and that the United States of America is operating, the way that we are being treated, the way that we are being kept, quote unquote, oppressed. There's no opportunity. There's no industry. Our sons and our daughters are being unfairly prosecuted. They are being sentenced to harsher penalties than other people. But you have no leg to stand on if you have not obtained and will not exercise political maturity. That's a fact. You can't blame anything or anyone else for your lack of involvement in the political process. You can't say that them people gonna do what they want to do. Well, those people who are elected in office can't do what they want to do if they never get in. Voting matters. It matters. It matters because you're voting for your attorney general. You're voting for your city council member. You're voting for your school board member. You're voting for your governor, your lieutenant governor. You are voting for your mayor, your dog catcher. You're voting for this stuff. These are the people who are supposed to represent your interest and doing what's right for the entire population. And when we don't vote, well, we get people like Trump in office. The two-time indicted former president of the United States. I mean, think about it, guys. We are 1 year removed from January the 6th, 2021. The insurrection on Capitol Hill. We are 1 year removed. We are 1 year removed from Confederate flags being hoisted, carried, waved in the Capitol. The loser's flag flown in the Capitol. Think about that. Think about the fact that all these so-called tough guys who were riding on Trump's coattails, right after that happened, when the initial fear was still in them, they came out and they said, you know what, we got to stop this. We can't have this. Oh gosh, our lives are in danger. See, it ain't no fun when the rabbit got the gun. But as soon as that thing kind of played out a little bit, as soon as that thing kind of played out, these jokers went back to doing exactly what they had been doing, exactly what we empowered them to do. We who did not vote. We who did not vote using political maturity. There's a lot of media attention on Louisiana right now. And I don't think that's fair. Louisiana had an amendment on the ballot, Amendment 7. And this amendment was presented to the voters to make an amendment to the state's constitution that would prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude. And let me just read how this read in the ballots. When you were actually casting your vote, if you had been voting in Louisiana, this is what you would have read in regards to this amendment. And this is directly from the Secretary of State's website. A yes vote supported. Number 1, removing language from the state constitution that allows involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime. And number 2, adding language to say that the section of the Constitution prohibiting slavery and involuntary servitude does not apply to the otherwise lawful administration of criminal justice. A no vote opposed removing language from the state constitution that allows involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, but that read like, if you vote yes, it is the same thing as if you voted no. This thing was so confusing. It was so watered down that the author of the bill, the original bill, State Representative Edmund Jordan, he encouraged voters to vote no on his bill because it was so confusing. And it was so confusing that it could have had unintended consequences, kind of like the crimes bill of 1995 that Clinton signed into action. All those unintended consequences. And you know that they have done a job on your bill when you have to come out and say, don't vote for that. We'll get it cleaned up and we'll present it at a later time. But the only thing that you're hearing in the media is that Louisiana voted no against outlawing slavery and indentured servitude. Well, there's a reason. The Republican-led House and the Republican Senate watered that bill down to effectively make it ineffective. And since we're talking about Louisiana, I need someone to explain to me how you can't be interested enough to get off your behind, register to vote, and actually go vote when your state senator in his opposition to quote unquote defund the police makes a statement in a state-ran TV ad that says, the next time you need the police, call a crackhead. Now, again, I'm no rocket scientist. The only people abusing crack, well, not the only people, the majority of the people who abuse crack cocaine, who are they? And you didn't have enough problem with that to say, you know what? I don't want this mother lover representing me. Maybe he wins, but he won't win because I didn't vote. And it's a problem when you have people in your state who don't take that view. His closest challenger was Gary Chambers. And it's reported that Chambers had a problem raising money. He couldn't get any donations to his campaign, so he was stuck on social media. He was stuck running his campaign basically from social media. And I was just home this weekend, and I was speaking to some of the residents of the area in which I frequent a lot. And to my surprise, many of them were like, we didn't even know who was running. We didn't know that the election was when the election was because it wasn't advertised. There was no radio ads. There was no TV commercials. And I kind of find that hard to believe, but let's just say that what they're telling me is true. Political maturity would have ensured that you knew that 2 years ago you had a midterm election and that Now you have a midterm election coming up. So it's incumbent upon me as a politically mature individual to go out and find out who's running, what they're campaigning on, and what's on the ballots to be voted on. There's never any reason to make the statement, I didn't know that we had an election, when it's on the level in which we just got out of. You have a midterm cycle, and then you have the 4-year cycle. They're 2 years apart from each other. So you know every 2 years, around the same time, you have an election. Elections are like birthdays, anniversaries, Mother's Day, Father's Day, the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Christmas. You know that they're going to happen around the same time every year. The only difference between an election and these dates that I've just mentioned is that they're every 2 years. Political maturity ensures that you're ready and that you are knowledgeable and that you are ready to do what is necessary for you to be able to cast your ballot. But again, you can't exercise something that you don't have. And so because Mr. Chambers did not have money, Mr. Chambers wasn't able to do radio ads. He wasn't able to do TV ads. He wasn't able to take care of all the logistics of visiting every parish in the state of Louisiana. And it didn't help. It didn't help that 55% of the eligible voters in the state did not vote. Out of the 3 million registered voters, only 1.3 million actually voted in these midterms. That's sad. But Louisiana's not by themselves. Because in Texas, 9.5 million registered voters failed to do so. You know, and after crying about drop boxes not being accessible, the early voting times periods being shortened, and all the other stuff that was put into place to discourage people from voting in the last election cycle. You know, we moan, we groan, we complain, and we respond across this country by not voting. Make it make sense. Not voting is not how you get what you want. 9.5 million registered voters failed to do so. Had half that number voted and voted for the other candidates, we'd have a different political climate in the state of Texas. We wouldn't have Greg Abbott as governor. We wouldn't have Dan Patrick as lieutenant governor. We wouldn't have Ken Paxton as the attorney general. Now, I've got problems with all three of these individuals, and it's not because I'm a Republican. It's not because I'm a Democrat. It's because I'm a human being. I have a problem with a governor who pushes for and gets a law that affects hundreds of thousands of people. And his response to being drilled about that is, well, we're going to eliminate rape. If eliminating rape were so easy, it would have been done. And there would be no reason to construct this law that made it so difficult for hundreds of thousands of people to make decisions concerning their own bodies. My issues with Greg Abbott are many. But there are two more that I really want to focus on. And the first one is his response to the Uvalde massacre. Greg and his people attempted to ensure that an impartial and just investigation, a timely investigation, didn't happen. They wanted to hide the findings. They wanted to wait until after the primary elections before they dealt with it. his response was so horrible that his rivals used his words as part of the campaign against him. Those words were, "It could have been worse." I don't understand how the murdering of elementary school kids, whether it's 1 or 100, could have been worse. When the state had programs and processes in place to keep mentally ill people from having weapons, was removed off the books at your insistence. This wasn't something that the voters voted on. This is something that you put into law through an executive order. And the second thing is that he refuses to acknowledge that Texas has a gun purchasing problem. He refuses to acknowledge it. But the damnable thing is that he refuses to do anything about it. Dan Patrick, he's borderline racist to me. That's my opinion. That is my opinion. I'm looking at his campaign ads towards the November 8th date, and one of his lines is the woke left extremist. Well, the word that caught my attention was woke. If you know anything about black culture, black jargon, woke is our word. So you're saying that it's the black left-leaning people who are a threat to Texas, who are a threat to the United States? Because in those same commercials, he was saying Texas is America's last hope. And then there's Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, the top law official agent in the state of Texas. Ken Paxton, who has been under indictment forever, has yet to receive his day in court, has done everything humanly possible to skirt that. And it's reported that he allegedly fled the state to prevent himself from being served a subpoena to appear in court regarding Texas's abortion law. And because 9.5 million registered voters in the state of Texas failed to vote, these three men can continue to ignore facts and make up their own narrative. They can continue to yell about a wall, building a wall on the southern border. Now, I don't know everything, but I know what I know. That wall ain't preventing nobody from getting into the United States of America. Not when you can go around it, under it, or over it. You're just wasting money. You're wasting taxpayer money on a process, on a project that has proven not to be effective. But yet, you're still yelling about a wall. You're ignoring the fact that most of the illegal immigration doesn't even happen at the southern border. It comes in from the northern border. Northern as in Canada border. Our grid still isn't fixed, and it's probably going to remain unfit for mass usage. I'm just hopeful that God doesn't see fit to let another winter storm come through Texas. Mass shootings, mass murder will continue to take place in places that are supposed to be safe spaces because of Texas's stupid gun law. You remove the requirement for people to have a permit, and now you can just carry open. And most importantly, corporations that come to Texas will continue to make record profits at the taxpayer's expense. But it's the quote unquote woke leftist extremists who's the problem. And I don't know what's going on in Georgia. The fact that Herschel Walker is in a runoff with Mr. Warnock, I mean, that's just ridiculous. In the words of Dave Chappelle on Saturday Night Live, Herschel Walker is observantly stupid. And the fact that he's in a runoff with a much better candidate, a much better human being, a much more moral sound human being is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. The fact that Stacey Abrams was basically blown out of the water. She was blown out of the water in her bid for governor. Why? Because we did not vote. We, working poor people, did not vote. Working poor people, black, brown, white, did not vote. But yet, when the stuff get real, when it get tight, your mouth gonna be open and you gonna be complaining. And I ain't got energy for it. I ain't got energy to listen to your complaints if you don't have the energy to do what needs to be done to make the changes. And as a result of this political ignorance and or political callousness, we now have 2 to 4 years of stupidity representing us in the highest places in our states and in our country. And this not only affects you and I, but it affects the children who are getting ready to graduate college, high school, who are getting ready to get out here in this workforce. And they are going to be dealing with the same crap that we had the ability to nip in the bud if we only practice political maturity. This is a 58-year-old concept. Political maturity is a 58-year-old concept that we have yet to obtain. We have yet to recognize as important. We have yet made any kind of strides to exercise properly. Let me ask you this. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, let me ask you this question. What is the benefit of your vote? Has the candidate that you voted for provided anything for you, your community, your state? Other than scandal, other than war, rumors of war, other than a collapsing stock market, which is a joke, record profits for corporations, inflation. What has your vote yielded you? And it amazes me. It amazes me how Republicans will sit there and say, the Biden administration, the Democrats or the independents, whoever else is in control other than them, they are running the country into the ground. This inflation is this, is that, and it's because of this and that. It's all the president's fault. That is a lie. The president doesn't control OPEC. The president doesn't control Russia going to war with Ukraine. The president doesn't control the Fed. Contrary to popular opinion, he does not control the Fed. He does not control corporate greed, because we've made sure that this is becoming a more capitalistic society, I'm doing air quotes, than it's ever been. And I know most of you guys have, short-term memory, selective amnesia. But let's not forget that it wasn't too long ago where every car industry, every U.S. car manufacturer was on the verge of bankruptcy. It wasn't too long ago that every bank in the United States was on the verge of bankruptcy. It wasn't too long ago when the airline industry was about to collapse in the United States. And who was in control of the House and the executive branch during that time? And who had to come in and fix it? But yet and still, you have these guys who will say, repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. We have a bigger and better plan. And some of you voted for them, only to find out that they didn't have a plan. All that they had was propaganda, rhetoric. All they had was talk. They had no plan. See, political maturity wouldn't allow you to forget that. Political maturity would keep that in the forefront of your mind when you're having to deal with these guys. And it's not a Republican issue. That's just the example that I use. And it's not a Democratic issue. It is a greed issue. It is a greed issue. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There's absolutely no way that you can convince me that when this government was framed, that it was intended for men and women to serve 20, 30 years in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, or as long as they could as a state representative, state senator, or governor. It was not intended to work that way. And what you end up getting is a bunch of people looking out for themselves and their friends instead of doing the job that they were sent to do, what they were elected to do, and that is for the people, by the people. And if you had a real understanding of political maturity, a lot of the stuff that's happening in our society right now, we could put an end to. We could have been put an end to. And with many of these politicians, it's never the issues that they take up. It's never the banner or fighting for the issues that they take up. It's stuff that doesn't even matter. Books did not lead to inflation. Books does not cause people to get pregnant as a result of being raped. Books do not murder people. Could it be the real reason that so many people are against and are actively fighting a true account of American history? The good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it, is because they're afraid of being recognized for their actions in their youth. Could it be that Mama or Papa is afraid that if true American history is taught, an accurate account of American history is taught in these books that they're trying to ban, that it's possible that a photograph of them might pop up and that their grandchildren and or great-grandchildren would recognize them throwing rocks at Ruby Bridges, spitting on individuals who were just trying to access a place of higher learning, throwing food and liquids on people who were sitting at a lunch counter trying to be served. Is that the real reason we have a problem with an accurate account of American history? But the issues that none of these guys seem to want to address are the issues that we, the working poor, are having to face daily. What are those issues? Inadequate education that leaves our children unprepared. We have a minimum wage versus a livable wage, meaning I'm going to pay you the least amount of money and expect you to do an exceptional, above standard job, and I'm going to pay you the least amount of money that I'm required to pay you, and you figure out the rest of it. You figure it out. How are you going to take care of yourself and your household with these minimum resources? Be like Nike, just do it. Fair lending practices, not only for homes, not only for education, but there should be fair lending practices for people who have a business plan and who want to start a business. Equal justice, equal sentencing, equal protection under the law. I, for one, would love to see some judicial reviews for some of these judges around the country who are doing these god-awful things to people who may have made a mistake. And they deserve some kind of punishment. However, you can't convince me that 2 ounces of weed is equal to rape, where 2 ounces of weed should get you 10 years, but if you rape somebody behind a dumpster, you get probation. That's not equal. That's not just. An issue that has plagued this country since its foundation, racism. Why are we still having to deal with this in 2022? Accountability. I don't care that you're a millionaire or that you're a billionaire or that you're a thousandaire or 100aire. You break the law. You are found guilty. You should serve the same penalty that the person who does not have a $10,000 an hour lawyer versus your public defender should have to serve. And the final thing that we should be concerned about, the issues, medical care. How is it that this country can put a robot on Mars, a man on the moon, a space station in space, and have it occupied with humans, but you can't find a cure for cancer? You can't find a cure for heart disease, high blood pressure, but you got plenty of medications that treats the symptoms, but does nothing to cure the problem. It doesn't take much thought to realize and understand why there aren't any cures, because the money is in the treatment. They would rather treat you and provide you a slow death than a full recovery from the disease. It amazes me the problem that people have with social programs designed to help people get back on their feet after experiencing circumstances or situations that may have set them back. You want to hold them to a different standard than you hold the wealthiest 1% of this country. There should be but one standard, one level of accountability. Where was that energy when the S&L loan scandal happened? You go back and you Google it. When the S&L loan scandal happened, millions of dollars went missing, right? Nobody was held accountable. Nobody had to pay any money back. Just recently, you had senators who were sitting on the Securities Committee listening to these top secret briefings about stocks and Wall Street and how things were getting ready to play out. And they went and sold and or bought stock to make money. However, you got a problem with the cancellation of debt, student loan debt, for a kid who is required to have a master's degree just to get an entry-level position in some company who's only gonna pay him minimum wage. Not a livable wage, minimum wage. You never have a problem with defense spending, but you got a problem with mental health spending. You got a problem with infrastructure. You've got a problem with things that would make life better for the majority of our citizens, the working poor. And this is the game plan, gang. Their intent is to keep us divided, to keep us distracted, to keep us pacified, to keep us entertained, so we won't recognize what it is that they're actually doing, and that is profiting off of our misery, our ignorance, and our callousness. Being politically mature is a huge deal. As I close, and I want to put this on your mind, they can overturn Roe versus Wade, which was the law of the land for 50 years, if they can overturn Roe versus Wade, what makes you think they won't overturn the 13th, the 15th, the 14th? What makes you think that the civil rights legislation 1964 won't be thrown in the trash if we continue to not obtain and not exercise political maturity? That's where we're headed. And if you want to live in that type of world with that type of pressure, you keep on doing what you're doing. But if you want to see changes that not only benefit you, but will benefit your community, will benefit your children, will benefit your children's children, I suggest that you obtain this political maturity and that you exercise this political maturity. It is life or death. It is the difference between surviving and thriving. That's what it boils down to. I value my qualitative living above your corporate greed, above your aspirations for power. There's no reason. There's no reason for a person to be in Congress for 20, 30, 40 years doing nothing but collecting a check. They don't have a problem with increasing their pay. They don't have a problem with obtaining the best medical treatment for themselves and their families. But when somebody says, hey, the working poor deserves a pay raise, the working poor deserves access to affordable and competent health care, oh, we got a problem with that. And if you don't have a problem with them having a problem with you being able to have access to these necessities of life, I just don't know what to say to you. I'm hoping that this podcast has provoked you, so much so that you will refuse to continue to be willfully ignorant, continue not to obtain and exercise political maturity. Political maturity is necessary. It is essential for the working poor to break these shackles and to thrive. I don't have a problem voting with a Republican as long as he's right. I don't have a problem voting for a Democrat as long as he or she is right. I don't care about political parties. I care about the best candidate, the most honest candidate, who's going to do the job that he or she is being elected to do. That's it. Bottom line. I don't care that you're black. I don't care that you're white. I don't care that you're gay. I don't care that you're trans. I don't care about any of this other stuff that they try to make a big deal about on mainstream news. I don't care about that. I care about what you do. I care about what you do and how what you do affects me and my community. That's what I care about. And that is what every American should care about. And final thought, to the young black men and women, to the middle-aged black men and women who say the voting doesn't count, the voting doesn't matter. Let's just say you're right. Let's say it doesn't matter. How about you go and open up a history book and look at what the Freedom Riders had to go through? How about you go and talk to your great uncle, your great auntie, if you have grandparents who are still alive? How about you go and talk to them and ask them about those times when they were fighting for this right? If nothing else, you should vote in honor of the ancestors and their sacrifice. Bottom line, in the story, if you vote for nothing else, it should be for that. We have got to do better. We've got to learn how to ask questions and seek truth. We have got to do better if we want to be better. No one has ever achieved anything by being lazy, uninformed, and callous. And we're so much better than that. We are so much more than that. The question is, do you believe it? And if you do believe it, your actions should show it.
This concludes this episode of Essential Discourse with Bruce Smith. We hope that your perspective has been elevated, that you have been edified, equipped, and encouraged as a result of listening today. If you found value in this episode, please recommend this podcast to your friends, families, associates, and colleagues. You can accomplish this by linking the podcast or podcast episode to your personal social media page. Your feedback and questions are welcomed. Please utilize the Facebook business page, Essential Discourse with Bruce Smith, or the Facebook group page, Essential Discourse Podcast Community, to provide your feedback. Additionally, please feel free to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on your favorite podcast streaming app. For additional information about the podcast, the host, guests, and more, please visit www.edpshow.com. Until next time, remember, it's okay to extend yourself a measure of grace. We learn to grow. We grow to mature. We mature to be perfected. Thanks again for listening to Essential Discourse with Bruce Smith.